The shutters rattled against the cabin walls. At 2:47 a.m., something tapped twice on the boards, but nothing was outside. I remember the first time I was told about the cabin. Folks around town called it the Hollow's house, though no one claimed to own it. It stood by the edge of a dry creek bed, half sunken into the ground. The windows were broken in odd, symmetrical patterns, as if the glass had cracked itself. Children dared one another to throw stones at it, but the stones were never found the next day. They vanished. I went there on a dare too. I thought it was nothing more than rotting wood and creaking beams. During the day, it looked harmless enough. Faded boards, sagging roof, wild vines climbing the chimney. But when dusk fell, the air around it grew heavier, as though the woods themselves leaned closer. Inside, it smelled like damp paper. Dust motes floated in the beams of my flashlight. I remember how silent it was. No birds, no crickets, not even the wind through the cracks. The silence pressed against me, like being underwater. The first time I heard the footsteps, I assumed it was my friend outside. Slow, deliberate steps across the boards upstairs. I called out, but the steps didn't pause. They circled once, then stopped above me. When I climbed the narrow staircase, the room was empty. Only my footprints in the dust. I swore I'd imagined it, until it happened again, and again. One winter, the sheriff said kids had broken in to party. He chased them out, nailed the door shut. But a week later, he drove by and saw lamplight flickering through the broken panes. He went inside alone. He told us later he'd searched every room, finding nothing, except the sound of heavy boots climbing down into the basement. The problem was, the cabin never had a basement. It became a pattern. Hunters heard pacing inside when the place was locked. Hikers reported whispers through the chimney. One family swore they saw shadows moving across the upstairs windows, even though the cabin had no floorboards left up there. I spent one night inside, determined to prove it was imagination. I set out salt along the doorframe, an old trick I'd heard in these mountains. I leaned iron nails across the sill, muttering that no spirit could cross. The night deepened, and with it came the sound. Footsteps, slow, heavy, crossing the boards. I whispered, "Who's there?" The steps stopped. Silence stretched for a full minute. Then from the far corner, 3 more steps. Circling closer, I froze. My lantern flickered, though the oil was fresh. The air turned damp and cold like breath against my skin. And then I heard it. The boards groaning as though someone leaned close, right beside my ear. I didn't stay. I bolted, slamming the door behind me. But even outside, on the path through the trees, I still heard it. Footsteps on the porch, following, matching my pace. Years later, I returned with a group, thinking strength in numbers would break the spell. We explored together, laughing too loudly, trying to mask the fear. For a while, nothing happened. No knocks, no whispers, no pacing. But just as we left, one of us turned back. His face went pale. "What?" I asked. He pointed at the doorway. Inside the cabin, where no one stood, we all heard it. Steady footsteps climbing the staircase. Slow, measured, certain. We didn't go back after that. The cabin still stands. People say if you walk by late at night, you can hear it. The steady tread of boots across boards that should have collapsed long ago. Some swear the sound follows them home. I don't know if it's true, but I do know this. Footsteps belong to someone. And inside that cabin, someone still hasn't left. The night I found the cabin, the storm had already turned the mountain roads to rivers of mud. I was a traveler, halfway through a delivery run, trying to outpace the sleet. When the headlights cut across a sagging porch deep in the trees, I didn't think twice. A roof was a roof, shelter from the storm. The door swung open with little effort, and inside was dust, a broken cot, a single chair. My lantern cast long shadows up the walls, catching on cobwebs and shelves half rotted with damp. I shut the door behind me and wedged my pack against it. That's when I noticed the basement hatch. It was a heavy door in the corner of the floor, ring handle black with rust. What struck me wasn't the door itself, but the nails hammered in a neat row around its edge. Iron nails, driven deep as if meant to hold something down. Someone had taken time to seal it, as if afraid of what might come up rather than what might go down. I tried to laugh it off. Old mountain superstitions. Nails keep out spirits, keeping the dead. But as the storm screamed outside, the hatch rattled under my boots. At first I thought it was the wind. Then I heard it, 3 slow knocks from beneath the boards. I told myself it was roots shifting in the earth. I told myself it was nothing. But the knocks came again, deliberate, and the nails along the hatch quivered like tuning forks. I dragged the chair on top of it and lay down on the cot, praying for sleep. But the storm outside only amplified the storm inside. Hours later, I woke to silence. The rain had stopped. The air inside was colder, damper, the way basements smell when left to rot. Then came the sound. Footsteps on the basement stairs. I froze, clutching the lantern. The hatch should have been sealed, yet the steps drew closer, stopping just beneath me. I could almost feel breath rising through the cracks. Then, with a long groan, the hatch lifted a fraction. The nails shrieked, as if pulled from the wood. I stumbled back, knocking over the lantern. In the flare of light, I saw fingers, pale, jointed wrong, pressing through the gap. I slammed the hatch shut, drove my boot against it, and hammered with my fists until the nails bent back into place. Silence followed. Not peace, silence. I told myself I'd wait until daylight. The sky outside was already paling. I packed my things and shouldered open the cabin door. That's when I realized something had changed. The lock, it was bolted. From the outside, I stared numb. I had shoved that door shut myself the night before. The bolt had been on the inside, but now it was slid tight across the planks, trapping me in. Someone, or something, had locked me inside while the thing below scratched at the hatch. I don't remember how long I pounded on that door, screaming into the trees. When it finally creaked open, no one stood outside. No footprints, no wagon tracks, nothing but morning fog. I left everything behind. The cot, the lantern, even my pack. I ran until the road spat me out near the county line. Later, when I told the sheriff, he shook his head. Said the cabin hadn't had a basement in 50 years. Said the foundations were filled in with stone. But I remember the nails. I remember the sound of them trembling one by one, as if something underneath wanted them out. And sometimes, when sleep won't come, I remember the weight of that door bolting shut. From the wrong side. The road in was a ribbon of mud and old snow, the kind that never fully leaves these hollows. We thought we were clever, a family running from bills and a town that had nothing left to give. The shelter was a sagging cabin a mile off the county road, 3 rooms and a porch that leaned like an old man. The owner, a cousin twice removed, said we could stay until spring if we cleared the chimney and paid what we could. We arrived at dusk with a truck full of blankets and canned goods, the mountains swallowing the light behind us. At first it felt like a miracle. Heat from a small wood stove, the smell of frying bacon, my daughter's laugh when she found a broken music box in a drawer. The nights were long but ordinary. Cards, shared stories, the wind in the pines. We nailed boards over the windows and hung quilts from the rafters. There were rules we all agreed on. No open flame near the quilts. Keep the stove fed. Don't wander after dark. We were careful. The first sign was small. A bottle we left on the porch, a cheap glass soda bottle, rolled off the step and shattered. We blamed the frost heave. A week later, another bottle, this time tucked on a shelf, was smashed in the middle of the night. I set it upright, muttered a blessing I'd heard down at church, and sprinkled salt across the threshold. It made sense then. Cold, animals, the cabin settling. Then the knocking began. It started as a soft, polite sound. 3 light knocks spaced like someone tapping a message in Morse. We'd all wake, heads lolling on pillows, and my wife would whisper, "Go check." I went, boots crunching on ice, lantern in hand. The porch was empty. Snow lay untouched. The nail I'd hammered into the post for good luck gleamed in the lantern light as if it had been placed there that minute. I'd laugh to myself and chalk it up to old wiring, or the house breathing. The nights grew stranger. The children's blankets would be folded perfectly at dawn, though none of us had risen. Footprints appeared in the powder inside the cabin that led nowhere, ending at a wall, circling back toward a mirror we'd propped against the mantel. One morning the mirror was covered in a thin film, like someone had breathed on it from the other side. We began to hear it inside the walls, a soft scraping, like fingernails combing the studs. The radio at the end of the hall would turn onto static between stations. Once, my youngest said, from his bed, there downstairs, I found him awake, eyes wide with a look I've never seen on a child. pupil wide and fixed, like someone had painted the pupil black and left only a ring of white. He wouldn't say who they were. We did the things people in these parts do when things lean toward the uncanny. I hung iron nails above the door. My wife poured salt in a line around the beds. We burned sage and left small bowls of whiskey by each window. Old offerings, more to comfort ourselves than out of any real faith. The county priest came once, led a short prayer, and left a printed sheet with instructions. If you feel compelled, bring the afflicted to daylight. He gave us no promises. Escalation happened subtly, then without mercy. Food began to spoil in ways that made no sense. The meat would smell sweet instead of sour, and the jam turned a dark, oily sheen as if some insect had crawled through it and left a shadow trail. At night, we heard children humming a lullaby none of us knew, a thin duet that seemed to come from the attic. My wife swore she saw a small pair of hands press against the inside of the pantry door, as if someone small had been trapped behind it for years. One evening, a storm pinned us in. The wood stove flared low. Snow lazed against the glass. My son slept in my lap. My wife was mending a sock by lamplight. Outside, the night tightened like a lid. Then, from the chimney, came a single loud thud, followed by 4 soft, methodical knocks against the hearth. We all looked up. The stove was cold. Nothing could have come down the flue. I stood, muscle memory taking me to the mantel to check mirrors and jars. A bottle near the window lay in pieces, though I'd set it upright that afternoon. That night, my daughter did not wake up. In the fog of the next day, we found footprints in the attic, small, bare, as if a child had padded along the beams. But there was no ladder, no signs of anyone exiting. In the corners, the salt we'd spread was dragged into thin, neat piles, as if gathered for some ritual. My wife could not stop calling for our girl, voice breaking against the empty rooms. The sheriff said runaways happen in winter. Kids leave to find warm relatives. I wanted to believe it. We left the next morning with our truck packed, the windows curtainless, the music box left on the table. My wife insisted we leave it. She said the sound would let someone find their way back. The road out was a ribbon of tracks, and for a while we drove in silence. Near the county line, my wife looked back. She said the cabin seemed to breathe, that the smoke from the chimney rose in curling letters, like words too small to see. Only one of us made it out whole. My wife curled into the seat and slept with her face taut, jaw set. My son began to cough blood on the second day, a dry, desperate sound. The doctors later called it exposure compounded by infection, common enough in these parts. But the way the cough started the morning after the knocks was a sequence I can't forget. My daughter's bed was made when the sheriff came through to check the place weeks later, and a single footprint was pressed into the thin dust on the floorboards, small, barefoot, leading toward the mirror on the mantel. The sheriff said he felt watched while he stood there. He closed the door and nailed it shut from the outside. People have theories. Some say it's carbon monoxide poisoning. Faulty chimneys and old stoves cause hallucinations. Others speak of old family curses, debts owed to someone in the hollow, or shacks built over graves that the living forget. Skeptics point to stress, isolation, the human brain trying to make stories in the dark. Maybe some of that is true. Maybe the lines between hunger, cold, and superstition blur in ways science can't cleanly divide. But I remember the shape at the foot of my daughter's bed that morning, as if someone small had stood there and watched her breathe, then turned and walked out. I remember the way my wife said, in a voice that was not entirely hers, "We shouldn't have stayed." I remember the bottle we left on the table later found in shards inside the stove, melted into something not quite glass. We never went back. People still talk about the family that tried to wait out winter in an old cabin and lost more than the season. I hear the lullaby sometimes when the wind hits just right. It's a thin, coaxing sound that asks the woods for company. The mine had shut down early that day. Storm clouds rolled in black as coal dust, and thunder rattled the hollow until the ground seemed to shiver beneath our boots. We were a crew of 6, but by nightfall I was alone on the trail, carrying nothing but my lunch pail and the lamp I'd borrowed from the shaft. That's when I saw the cabin. It sat crooked at the bend of a washed-out path, roof sagging, windows dark. I should have kept walking, but the rain hit like stones, and the wind snapped branches clean. My bones ached for a roof, any roof. I pushed the door open, and the storm seemed to die the instant I stepped inside. The place smelled of iron and wet ash. A table stood in the center, and on it, though no fire burned, someone had set a lantern. The flame glowed steady, no wick, no oil. Just a pale yellow light, as though it wanted to be seen. I should have turned back right then, but the storm howled through the cracks in the walls, and I told myself a roof was a roof. I set my pail down. My lamp flickered. Then I heard it, a low rhythm from beneath the floorboards. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, pause. Like a pickaxe striking stone. I froze. That rhythm was too familiar. I'd swung a pick half my life, and I knew the sound of a miner's work. But this tapping wasn't in stone. It was in wood. I bent low, pressed my ear to the floor. The sound was beneath me, clear as breath. Tap, tap. Who's down there? I whispered. Silence, then a reply. Not words, but a shift, a dragging sound, as if boots shuffled across rock. I backed away, heart hammering. My lantern hissed and died, though the one on the table burned steady, brighter now, its glow licking up the walls. The shadows lengthened, bending in ways that didn't match the flame. The storm outside raged, but inside I heard something else, breathing, not mine. Not close, but deep below, rising through the boards like the hollow itself had lungs. I forced the door. It wouldn't budge. The wood had swollen, or maybe the storm pinned it shut. I beat on it with my fists until my knuckles split. Behind me, the breathing grew heavier, and the tapping resumed. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, pause. I thought of the old stories the foreman used to tell. Lost miners, trapped miles underground, still digging, still searching for light. The dead who never stopped working. The lamp on the table flared white. In its glow, I saw handprints pressed against the inside of the walls, too many to count. Each print black as soot, fingers long, palms wide. Some pressed in high near the rafters, some crawling low along the floor. None of them mine. The boards beneath me buckled. I heard the groan of nails tearing free one by one. From the seams in the wood, cold air rushed up, carrying the smell of sulfur and damp stone. I ran to the window, shoved my shoulder through the glass. It cracked. But instead of rain, I felt dust, dry, choking dust, like a mine shaft caving in. When I pulled back, the world outside wasn't storm or forest. It was black rock, endless, broken only by the faint glint of water trickling down unseen walls. I stumbled back toward the table. The lantern flame stretched tall, twisting into the shape of a figure hunched with a pickaxe in hand. Its face was nothing but black hollows where eyes should have been. The rhythm grew deafening. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, pause, and then silence. The next morning, when the storm cleared, the crew came looking. They found my lunch pail on the porch, my coat folded on the chair. The cabin door stood wide open. Inside, there was nothing. No lantern, no table, no sign I'd ever been there. Just a single boot print sunk deep into the dust, leading toward the wall where the boards had split. The sheriff said I must have lost my way in the storm, wandered into the creek. That's what they told my mother. But some nights, when the wind blows through the shaft, the men swear they hear tapping in the timbers. Always the same rhythm, tap, tap, pause. They say a miner took shelter in a cabin one night and never came out. They say he's still down there digging. And when the walls tremble, when dust falls from the beams, the old hands spit in the dirt and whisper, "He's close." The cabin was nothing but a one-room shack my uncle swore was good for hunting trips. We went in early March, when the mountains were still rimmed with ice and the streams carried snowmelt sharp enough to numb your bones. The place had no electricity, just a wood stove, a cot, and a single glass window that faced east. That window became the thing I'll never forget. The first night passed without incident. We cooked beans on the stove, played cards, and listened to the timber wolves calling out in the dark. I laid my bedroll by the wall beneath the window. The glass was old, bubbled with imperfections and streaked with dust, but at dawn the first light broke through and painted the room gold. For a moment it looked peaceful, until I saw the reflection. At first I thought it was my uncle. A figure in the window, pale face bent forward watching me. I turned to greet him, but he was snoring on the cot, back turned. When I looked back, the reflection remained. Not matching either of us, but someone else entirely. The face was lean, hollow-eyed, with skin that looked stretched thin as paper. Its mouth never moved, but its eyes seemed to know me. Just as quickly, the light shifted and the face was gone. I told myself it was a trick of dawn, the way old glass bends light. But the next morning it returned. Not in a flash, not faint, but clear. A stranger staring through my own reflection, standing behind me in the glass, though the room was empty. This time my uncle saw it too. He woke before sunrise, muttering about the stove, and caught sight of the glass. He cursed low, pulled the blanket over his head, and refused to look again. "That window's bad luck," he said. "Leave it covered." But when I pressed him for more, he only shook his head. On the third morning, I decided to test it. I sat up before dawn, waiting. The cabin was quiet, wood popping in the stove. As the first light spilled across the sill, the face emerged, clearer than before, sharper, like it was pressing closer. This time its lips parted. I didn't hear words. I heard breathing, a slow, measured breath that fogged the glass from the inside. I bolted upright, heart hammering, and the sound ceased. But a smear remained, a long streak down the glass, as though someone's hand had dragged across it from within. We tried to cover the window with quilts, but by morning they were always on the floor. We nailed boards across it, only to find the nails bent backward, twisted like soft wire. The reflection kept coming, always at dawn, always staring. By the end of the week, neither of us could sleep. My uncle packed to leave, muttering prayers, but I stayed behind, too stubborn, too afraid of running. I wanted to know what it wanted. The final morning I waited, lantern lit. When the light came, the face appeared as always. But this time it wasn't alone. Behind it, in the reflection, stood others, figures crowded shoulder to shoulder, pale eyes staring, their shapes stretching into the corners of the glass. I spun around. The cabin was empty, yet in the window they pressed closer, lips moving silently, mouths opening wide until the glass fogged with their breath. And then for the first time the reflection didn't vanish with the light. It stayed. It stayed even as I stood, even as I hammered boards, even as I fled into the daylight. I don't remember running back to town. I only remember the sheriff dragging me into the diner, asking why I kept looking over my shoulder. I told him the truth. He only nodded, said other hunters had left that cabin the same way, pale, half-spoken, eyes fixed on nothing anyone else could see. The cabin still stands, but they say the window is gone. Shattered from the inside out, pieces scattered in the dirt, each shard still holding a reflection that isn't yours. I don't know what looked back at me all those mornings, but when I close my eyes at dawn, I still feel its breath fogging the glass. The cabin had stood empty for years. Everyone in town knew it, everyone avoided it. It was the kind of place that swallowed light, even on clear mornings. Kids dared one another to run up and touch the porch, but no one ever lingered. The boards sagged, the roof leaned, and vines had wrapped themselves tight around the chimney like fingers. Folks said it was cursed land, but most just called it the hollow cabin. I never planned to go near it. But one night, coming back late from the mill, I heard something that froze me in place, a scream. It was high and sharp, then cut off, echoing across the hollow like the trees themselves had carried it. I stopped the truck in the middle of the road, engine running, and listened. A second scream followed, not faint, not far. It came straight from that abandoned cabin. I should have driven on. That would have been the smart thing. But something in the sound made it impossible. It wasn't just fear, it was pleading. I pulled the truck to the side and climbed out. The night was still, no wind, no crickets, just silence heavy as the dark. The cabin loomed at the edge of the clearing, windows black, door half off its hinges. As I stepped onto the porch, the boards groaned. Another scream split the silence, this one muffled as though buried deep inside. I pushed the door open. The room beyond was empty. Dust thick enough to choke on, furniture broken in heaps. The fireplace was cold, filled with ash that looked disturbed, like something had moved through it recently. "Hello?" I called. My voice cracked. "Anyone in here?" No answer. Just the echo of my own breath. Then it came again. Not a scream this time. A low moan, drawn out, rattling the boards beneath my feet. It was coming from below. I remembered the stories. The cabin didn't have a basement. It wasn't built that way. But the sound was real, vibrating up through the floor like someone calling from the dirt itself. I dropped to my knees, pressed my ear to the boards. The moan rose to a cry, words forming but too broken to understand. I staggered back, heart slamming against my ribs. That's when the door slammed shut behind me. I spun, lantern shaking. The porch stood empty, but the bolt had slid across on its own. I ran to it, shoved, hammered, but it held fast. The screams grew louder now, rising and falling, overlapping, as if more than one voice filled the walls. They didn't sound far anymore. They sounded close. Too close. The air thickened, damp like the inside of a cave. From the corner of the room, I saw it, a seam along the floorboards I hadn't noticed before. A trapdoor. I don't know what pulled me toward it. Curiosity, fear, the hope of finding someone alive. I knelt, gripped the rusted ring and lifted. The space below was black. No stairs, no floor, just a void that seemed to breathe. And from that void, the screams poured out all at once. Men, women, children, hundreds of voices rising together until the sound shook the walls. I dropped the hatch, stumbled back, and clutched the lantern tight. The light sputtered, shadows stretching long across the room. In those shadows, I swear I saw shapes, arms reaching, mouths open in silent wails. Then, as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. The silence was worse. The bolt on the door slid free with a slow scrape. The cold night air rushed in. I didn't look back. I ran, lantern swinging wild, boots tearing through the weeds until the cabin vanished behind me. Later, when I told the sheriff, he said no one else had heard a thing that night. No reports, no missing persons. He chalked it up to exhaustion and nerves. But he wouldn't look me in the eye when he said it. Weeks later, a pair of hunters set up near that clearing. At dawn, they swore they heard cries drifting through the trees. A chorus of screams that didn't end until they packed their gear and left. The cabin still stands. Nobody claims it. Nobody touches it. But every so often, when the night is still, folks say the air fills with voices. Not one, not two, dozens, all crying to be let out. The hunt had gone longer than I planned. By the time I gutted the deer and packed my gear, the sky had already turned the color of iron. I knew the trail back would take hours, and I didn't have the light for it. That's when I remembered the cabin. A half-rotten place tucked against the ridge, used by hunters for generations. No one claimed it, but everyone knew it. I reached it just as the woods went silent. The porch sagged, the shutters clattered weakly in the wind. Inside smelled of mold and old pine smoke. Still, it was shelter, and I was too tired to care. I built a fire in the stone hearth. The room flickered warm, shadows stretching across the logs. I laid my bedroll near the corner and listened to the crackle, trying to ignore how quiet the forest had grown outside. No owls, no coyotes, not even the drip of melted frost. That's when I heard the first sound. A breath. It was faint, so faint I thought it was mine. But it came from behind me, low, steady, as if someone stood in the far corner. I turned. Nothing but my rifle propped against the wall. I laughed it off, shook my head, and lay down. But as I closed my eyes, it came again. Closer this time. A deep inhale, a slow exhale, like lungs filling the whole cabin. I whispered into the dark, "Who's there?" The breath stopped. Silence pressed in, heavy as stone. My heart pounded, and I told myself I was jumpy, tired. Hunters hear things in the woods all the time. I drifted in and out of sleep. Then came the second sound. Footsteps, not outside, inside. They circled the room once, slow and deliberate. Boots on wood. I bolted upright, lantern in hand. No one was there. The fire still burned steady, shadows still swayed. But the footsteps had been real, too real. I sat awake until the fire died low. My eyelids grew heavy, and against my better judgment, I lay back down. That's when I heard the third sound. Whispering. Faint at first, like wind threading through cracks. Then clearer. Words I couldn't place, rolling low and fast, spoken in unison. A language I'd never heard, but the cadence chilled me. It was not meant for me. It was meant for someone else. The whispers swelled, rising from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, until I clapped my hands over my ears. My lantern shattered on the floor and the fire flared sudden blue. In that light I saw them, shapes pressed against the log walls, outlines of hands and faces pushing through as if the wood was soft clay. I ran. I snatched my rifle, flung open the cabin door, and sprinted into the trees. Behind me, the whispers broke into laughter, low, guttural, echoing from everywhere at once. I didn't stop until the ridge dropped me into a clearing and the stars reappeared overhead. The next morning, I returned with 2 others from town. The cabin was empty, fire long cold, but the walls were different. They were marked with prints, dozens, maybe hundreds, small, large, some pressed so deep they split the bark. Every wall bore them. I don't hunt that ridge anymore. I don't camp in cabins I don't know. But some nights, when the woods fall too quiet, I remember that breath on my neck. The long inhale, the slower exhale, and I run. The cabin was a black scar in the hollow long before I ever set eyes on it. Folks whispered about the night it burned, flames roaring high enough to stain the sky, smoke curling thick, yet in the morning, the walls still stood. No scorch marks, no cinders, just the smell of ash and a memory too heavy for words. I didn't believe it. Fire leaves proof. Fire leaves ruin. But when I hiked out there one autumn, I smelled it before I saw it. That bitter tang of smoke, sharp as coal soot. The cabin stood whole, every board intact, roof unbroken. Yet the clearing around it was littered with blackened soil as though the earth itself had burned. I stepped onto the porch. The air grew hotter, though the day was cool. Inside, the air shimmered like a mirage, heat rolling invisible waves across the beams. My lantern glass fogged. My skin prickled as if I'd leaned too close to a stove. Yet the walls, pale dry pine, showed not a single burn. That night I camped nearby, stubborn curiosity holding me. At midnight, I woke to light spilling through the cracks in the shutters. Orange, flickering. I staggered to the door, and when I opened it, the cabin was ablaze inside. Flames curled across the rafters, smoke churned thick, but nothing burned. The wood did not char, the quilts did not blacken, the floor remained untouched. It was a fire that consumed without consuming. I heard voices in it, screams, layered and endless, as if the fire carried every cry it had ever devoured. My lungs seized, though no smoke reached me. My eyes watered, though the air was clear. I clutched the doorframe, torn between fleeing and watching. Then I saw them. Shapes in the fire, figures pacing the room, arms thrashing, faces contorted in silent agony. They moved in patterns, circling the table, collapsing against the walls, rising again. Over and over, as though reliving their last moments. One turned toward me. Its mouth opened wide, and from it came a roar of flame so bright it blinded me. I fell back into the dirt, blinking spots from my eyes. When I looked again, the cabin was dark, silent, cold. Not a single ember glowed. I left that night, stumbling back to the trailhead. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. A fire that burned nothing, yet left screams behind. Later, I learned the story. In 1932, a family had wintered there, 5 souls trapped by snow. When neighbors finally reached the hollow, they found the cabin untouched, but inside every body was charred beyond recognition. The fire marshal claimed a stove accident, but no damage was found to the building itself, just the bodies. Since then, hikers swear the cabin relights itself. Flames dance in its windows but vanish when anyone draws near. Some say it's a warning, others say it's a trap, luring the curious into a fire that doesn't need wood to spread. I've seen it. I've felt the heat on my skin, the roar in my ears, the weight of voices that never faded. The cabin still stands, walls white as bone. But when the night is still and the wind carries the smell of ash, I keep walking. Because not every fire burns wood. Some burn only people. The cabin sat at the edge of the ridge, built by my grandfather's own hands. He used it for trapping in the 1940s, then left it to rot. When I returned years later, after losing my job and needing a place to be alone, I thought it would be nothing more than old boards and quiet nights. The first evening was calm enough. I unpacked, swept dust from the floor, and lit a lantern. The mountains outside were hushed, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I ate a meal of beans and bread, stoked the stove, and lay down on the cot. That's when I heard it. 3 sharp knocks on the door. I froze. The cabin sat miles from the nearest road. Nobody should have been out there. I waited, breath held, until the silence returned. When I opened the door, the clearing was empty. No footprints, no lantern light, just the pines standing black against the moon. The next night, it happened again. 3 knocks, steady and sure. I opened the door quicker this time, but again nothing stood there. The snow outside was untouched, not even a rabbit track. By the third night I stopped opening the door. I just sat on the cot listening. Knock, 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 always the same rhythm. Always at midnight. The lantern flame trembled each time as if the sound rattled the very air. I tried to rationalize. Wood shrinks in the cold. Trees shift. But why always 3? Why always the same time? I began marking it down in my notebook. Night 1, 3 knocks. Door empty. Night 2, 3 knocks, same. Night 3, 3 knocks. Felt closer. On the 4th night, something changed. The knocks came, but slower, heavier. After the 3rd, I heard dragging, like fingernails scraping the wood. Then a voice, low and hoarse, whispered through the crack, "Let me in." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The whisper came again, louder, pressing against the boards. "Let me in." I threw salt across the threshold, the way my grandmother taught me. I laid iron nails along the sill. The whisper stopped. The knocks never came that night. But the next evening, they returned, louder, angrier. The whole frame shook with the pounding. My lantern shattered, plunging the room into dark. I sat there in the pitch black, heart hammering. As the knocks grew so violent, I swore the door would split. Then silence. I thought it was over until morning. But when the sun rose, I saw them. 3 long grooves carved into the wood, deep enough to bleed sap. Not made by hands. Not by any tool I know. I left that day, swore never to sleep there again. But locals say if you pass that cabin at night, you'll hear it. 3 knocks, steady as a heartbeat. No one answers anymore. And maybe that's the only reason the door still stands. The cabin was small, almost cozy, tucked deep in the Appalachian woods. I'd rented it cheap, a weekend escape to breathe away the noise of town. The owner gave me the keys with one strange warning. At night, keep every mirror covered. Don't let the glass show until morning. I thought it was superstition, old mountain lore. But when I stepped inside, I noticed something odd. Every reflective surface was already hidden. Cloths pinned over the bathroom mirror, sheets draped across old picture frames, even the square of glass above the mantel smothered beneath a heavy quilt. I laughed at first. It felt like a game. But as dusk settled, the laughter grew uneasy. Shadows stretched long in the corners, and the quilts seemed heavier, purposeful, as though they weren't hiding glass but restraining it. That first night, I left one uncovered, a small hand mirror I found in the drawer. I told myself I'd prove the legend wrong. By midnight, I regretted it. I woke to the sound of tapping, not on the window, on the mirror. Soft, deliberate. Tap, tap, it'd tap. I sat up, sweat cold on my skin. The mirror lay across the room on the dresser. In the pale moonlight, I saw it tremble against the wood, each tap pushing it an inch closer to the edge. I scrambled up, covered it with my coat, and the sound stopped instantly. The second night, I obeyed. I kept every mirror covered. Still, I woke before dawn to find the cloths disturbed. Not gone, not fallen, pulled aside. Just enough to reveal slivers of glass. And in those slivers, reflections that weren't mine. A face pale and thin. A hand too long, pressed against the inside. Eyes black as coal, staring not at the cabin but at me. By the third night, I couldn't sleep. I sat awake by the fire, watching the draped mirrors as though they might shift on their own. The silence of the woods pressed hard against the cabin walls. At 3 a.m., every cloth slipped at once. The room filled with glass. 10 reflections, 20, all of them moving wrong. Some smiled when I didn't. Some turned their heads when mine was still. One reached out of the mirror, pressing so hard the surface rippled like water. I dropped the lantern. Darkness swallowed the room. In the black, I heard the glass humming, vibrating low, a chorus of voices overlapping. Stay with us. Stay with us. Stay. The moment the first line of daylight broke through the window, it all stopped. Every cloth lay neatly pinned back in place. The glass showed nothing but dust. I left the cabin that morning. I didn't pack, didn't check out, didn't even lock the door. I drove until the woods fell behind me and swore I'd never return. But the worst part came after. At home, I noticed the mirrors I'd lived with my whole life looked different. The bathroom glass seemed too deep, too dark. The hallway mirror showed me half a second late, as though my reflection lagged behind. And every dawn, just as the light shifts, I swear I see hands pressing from the other side. The cabin is still there. Folks say the owner stopped renting it. Some claim the quilts remain pinned, untouched, as if whoever left them meant to keep something sealed forever. Not every warning is folklore. Some are instructions for survival, and I learned too late that some reflections are not your own.